Hello and welcome to PMQs with Graham Hughes, and we're going straight to the chamber, straight over to Keir Starmer, who's asking the first question. Here we go.
The opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister obviously thinks so little of his own MPs that he's had to peel David Cameron away from his 7-year exile in a shepherd's hut and make him Foreign Secretary. But a few months ago, the Intelligence and Security Committee said that the now Foreign Secretary's role in a Chinese investment fund may have been, and this is their words, engineered by the Chinese state.
Oh, nice.
I hardly need to remind the Prime Minister of the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party or the intimidation against members of this House. So when will he instruct the Foreign Secretary to give full public disclosure of his work for Chinese interests?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm delighted that the former Prime Minister has rejoined government as Foreign Secretary. As an individual with unrivalled experience, he will help Britain navigate an uncertain world in challenging times. Of course, like every other government minister, he will go through the normal process with the independent advisor. But the government's position on China is clear. China represents an epoch-defining challenge. That's why we have taken strong and robust steps to protect ourselves against the risk that it poses. But we'll take no lessons, Mr. Speaker, from the Labour Party on protecting our national security. They've taken almost £700,000 from an alleged Chinese agent.
Mr. Speaker,
It's not... Sorry? Yes, I think now you're on the front bench, we need to just calm down. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, for someone who spent the last few weeks complaining about recycling bins, it's ironic that his latest reset involves recycling the architects of 13 years of Tory failure. But this is the Prime Minister who also reanimated the career of the member for Fareham in order to resuscitate his own just days after she was sacked for a national security breach. Is he ashamed that he was so desperate to become Tory leader, so scared to face a vote, that he put someone so totally unfit for office in charge of Britain's national security?
Mr. Speaker, he mentions 13 years. We remember what happened at the beginning of that 13 years. It was this party that restored this country's financial security after the Labour Party left no money behind.
Our economy hasn't grown in 16 years.
Lies on security from a man who wanted to make the former member for Islington.
Lies, 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 and now he's bringing up Jeremy Corbyn. In emergency, smash glass, bring out Jeremy Corbyn. Here we go.
Prime Minister of our country.
The member for Islington North isn't even a Labour MP anymore. A change party and strong leadership. Mr. Speaker.
Luke, with a lot of business today, very important business with some important votes, and I want to get through this speedily. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, for 13 years our security has been undermined by this Tory government. And now the most ridiculous, pathetic spectacle of all. His Rwanda scheme, cooked up with his National Security Threat Home Secretary, has blown up. He was told over and over again that this would happen, that it wouldn't work, and it was just the latest Tory gimmick. But he bet everything on it, and now he's totally exposed. The central pillar of his government has crumbled beneath him. Does he want to apologise to the country for wasting £140 million of taxpayer cash and wasting his entire time in office?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the person didn't hear what I said about our approach to Rwanda, and not least when it comes to stopping the boats. Rwanda is one part of our plan which has already delivered a reduction in the number of small boats this year by a third, Mr. Speaker.
That was the
but
weather.
He talks about apologising. He talks about the former member not being a Labour MP now. Yes, he wasn't a Labour MP when he declined 15 different times to say that Hamas was a terrorist organisation.
He's still not a Labour MP.
Which is shameful. But he's
still not a Labour MP.
Indeed, The honourable gentleman served with him. He told the country he would make a great Prime Minister. At that
You were
point,
Chancellor
he described
under
her
the
massive
actual
friends.
Prime
Does he want to
Minister,
apologise
Boris
for that
Johnson.
now?
Boris Johnson, who has proved to be a liar.
Are we serious?
Oh my God, he's still going on about Corbyn.
Because I'm going to
Desperation.
Oh, I wouldn't challenge. Because I'm
Desperation
going
is
to say,
palpable.
our constituents are watching this. They're very, very concerned about the affairs of today.
David Cameron's
They're very
aren't,
concerned
'cause he
about
hasn't
the
got
votes
any.
later. A lot of members wish to speak. Those who don't want that to happen, please, go outside, go and have a conversation there. You want to bawl and shout, do it elsewhere. But it won't be happening in here today. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad he agrees this is a changed Labour Party. And while he was wasting his time on this gimmick, the asylum backlog has swollen to 175,000 people. Taxpayers are paying £8 million a day on hotel bills, and 615 people arrived by small boat last Sunday alone.
Unbelievable.
Plan A has failed. And after this session, whether he likes it or not, he'll have to go back to his office, back to the drawing board, and start from scratch. Can he assure the British public that he will drop what his former Home Secretary calls his magical thinking and start treating small boat crossings with the seriousness that they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about a changed Labour Party. Perhaps we'll see that this evening. He can't even make his party do the right thing when it comes to standing by Israel in the vote later today. He talks about taking small boats crossing seriously. He's opposed every single measure that we have taken, Mr. Speaker. Again, let me update him on what we've done this year. The number of illegal Albania arrivals down by 90%. 20,000 people returned this year. The number of crossings down by a third. He mentioned hotels, closing 50 of them. Money being saved for taxpayers. All, by the way, opposed by the party opposite. What is the honourable gentleman's plan? Yes, there we have it. A cosy deal with the EU, which would see the UK accept 100,000 illegal migrants. He doesn't want to stop the boats, he wants to welcome more of them.
Mr. Speaker, it's very straightforward. He promised that he would stop the boats this year. This year. Today is the 15th of November. He's wasted all of his time on a gimmick, and now he's absolutely nowhere. Will he level with the British public and finally admit he's failed to deliver on his promise?
Mr. Speaker, this government has done more to tackle illegal migration than any in the past. And again, let's just review, Mr. Speaker.
You've caused more illegal
migration.
migration.
Side of this issue his entire career.
This
is a man who described all immigration law as racist.
No one came on boats.
He said it was a mistake to control immigration, and he has never once in this place voted for stricter asylum rules. It's clear, Mr. Speaker, while he might want to listen to the open border activists, I'm siding with the British people.
He's always been in opposition. So he's supposed to vote against.
I would have thought if he was confident about his promise, he would have given an answer saying he stands by it and will deliver by the end of the year. But the absence of that answer is absolutely amazing in the circumstances. He's had 3 reshuffles, a forgotten conference speech, an empty King's speech. He even found time to fanboy Elon Musk. But not one of them has made the slightest difference to the lives of working people. If we had £1 for every time we had a reset, the cost of living crisis would be over long ago. Now, he likes to think of himself as the man from Silicon Valley, the tech-savvy Californian, the country's first AIPM. And yet his big idea is to keep turning his government on and off and hope at the wall and hope that we'll see signs of life. Is he starting to feel that, as somebody once said, he was the future once?
Mr. Speaker, I slightly missed the end of that, but I've got to say, I was glad to hear finally that the honourable gentleman did bring up the cost of living, because on that he is right. That is the #1 challenge facing countries up and down the family. And today,
countries up and down the family.
He mentioned it, but what
What?
he failed to recognise,
Countries up and down the family.
Promises, today was a day that we delivered on the most important pledge I make to halve inflation, Mr. Speaker. Delivering on a commitment, easing the burden for families up and down the country. What we would see from the party opposite is everything would jeopardise that progress, borrowing £28 billion a year, undermining our energy security, giving in to inflation-busting pay rises to his union backers. That's not a sensible plan, Mr. Speaker. It would push up mortgage rates, push up inflation, harm working families, all the while we're going to continue delivering for the country.
He said delivering.
Now
Thanks
for
very much,
something
Juan
completely
Angry
different, question 4.
We are. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure my honourable friend will be delighted that the West Midlands now tops regional rankings for foreign direct investment. The government is also significantly investing in the region, including hundreds of millions of pounds for Levelling Up Fund and Towns Fund investments, and introducing a new pilot scheme to help businesses in the region become more energy efficient.
Sir Michael.
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for that encouraging answer? And on behalf of my constituents in Lichfield, may I thank him for having the guts to actually stop HS2. But can I ask that the area within my constituency in the north, where construction is still going on, that this happens swiftly, and that those areas which are not going to have HS2, compensation is also made swiftly to those people who are expecting it.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his question, but also for his consistent campaigning on this issue, and I recall his last question at Prime Minister's Questions on this very topic. I'd like to reassure him that we are committed to fair treatment for people affected by the changes, whilst also protecting taxpayers appropriately. Wherever property has been acquired for HS2, property owners have been fully compensated, and any outstanding cases will be settled. We are developing a programme to sell the surplus land on HS2 Phase 2 and ensure that it delivers value for money, does not disrupt local property markets, and I'll ensure that the Rail Minister talks and meets with him swiftly on behalf of his constituents.
MP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, in 2010, the then Prime Minister and now Foreign Secretary David Cameron said that people in Gaza are living under constant attacks and pressure in an open-air prison. Does the current Prime Minister not agree that if there is not an immediate ceasefire, then all of us in this chamber will be watching on as that open-air prison is turned into a graveyard?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no one can deny the suffering that the people in Gaza are undergoing at the moment. I spoke about this on Monday, and I spoke about it consistently with Mahmoud Abbas, the President of the Palestinian Authority, which is why we're doing everything we can to get aid into the region, and we have repeatedly and consistently called for humanitarian pauses to get aid in and to get hostages and those that need to get out, foreign nationals, as quickly as possible, and will continue, as the Foreign Secretary will do, to make sure that that happens.
Thanks for the super chat.
Mr. Speaker, how much worse does it need to get? 4,609 children are already dead in Gaza. Babies in the neonatal intensive care unit are dying because they don't have access to oxygen. For members across the House, this is a question of values, and it is a question of conscience. So does the Prime Minister not agree that should there be a vote on an immediate ceasefire, that members across the House should be afforded a free vote?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, our position as a government is clear on this. It's right that Israel is able to defend itself, and that principle is one which we support. It has suffered an appalling terrorist attack. Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and it is not just Israel's right but duty to protect its citizens. At the same time, we have consistently at the United Nations and bilaterally with all our partners called for humanitarian pauses to ensure that more aid can get in, hostages and nationals can get out. That's the right thing to do. We will continue to do everything we can to alleviate the suffering that the Palestinian people are undergoing, and I'm confident that our efforts are already making a big difference on the ground.
Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kirklees Council have closed Dewsbury Sports Centre, delivered just 14% of educational health
Just on this, I don't know why the Labour Party under Starmer can't call for a ceasefire. The reason being is that a ceasefire is supposed to be for both sides. So it will be for the Israelis, the IDF, the Israeli government, and it would also be for Hamas. And Hamas are going to ignore it. They are going to ignore it anyway. So in a way, yes, it is posture politicking. It's not going to make any difference to the people down on the ground. But it does seem like quite, it's playing semantics to go, oh yeah, well, we want to have humanitarian pauses, but we're not going to call for a ceasefire. Are they kind of the same thing? Like, I mean, I don't really understand the reticence to just say, it would be great if you could stop firing your weapons, lads. Because you know what's going to happen. They'll stop firing the weapons and they'll let some humanitarian aid in. And then the Gazans will fire a rocket and they'll say, oh, they started it. And then they'll go in again. So that's what's going to happen. It doesn't really matter whether we call for a ceasefire or a humanitarian pause or just sit in our hands and do literally nothing at this juncture. There's nothing we can do. Even if we put mad sanctions on Israel, you've seen how effective sanctions were on stopping Russia from going into Ukraine. Not particularly successful at all. Russia still has 20% of Ukraine, despite calls for the country to get the hell out of its neighbour for the last 18 months. Longer, Jesus.
Care plans with a 20-week target are unable to deliver a 5-year land supply, just free of its many failings. And now they want to introduce extortionate car parking charges, punishing hard-working families and destroying the high street in our towns and villages. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that Labour-run Kirklees Council is no longer fit for purpose?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I share my honourable friend's disappointment with the Labour-run council in Kirklees. Just this week, we saw, I believe, a Labour councillor suspended for anti-Semitism. As he said, they've also closed the Dewsbury Sports Centre and are proposing to increase car parking charges, punishing local businesses and shoppers in the run-up to Christmas. The council is clearly no longer fit for purpose, and local residents deserve better.
Speaker, last week, members from across the House heard testimony from a young Israeli man who lost both of his peace campaigning parents in the October the 7th attack. This morning we heard from Palestinians who have lost generations of families in the south of Gaza because of the military attacks there. This is a question of humanity and morality.
Hear, hear.
The Prime Minister has an opportunity to lead the calls for peace or endorse death, violence and destruction. Which will he choose?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's an extremely naive and simplistic way to look at the problem. What he failed to mention in his question was the fact that a proscribed terrorist organisation perpetrated an awful attack on over 1,000 individuals, and Israel has every right to defend itself in those circumstances, and their country would expect nothing less for them to provide security for their citizens. Now, of course, alongside that, they must abide by international law, and we will do everything we can, as I have said, to make sure that aid flows in and provides alleviation to the suffering that the people in Gaza are seeing.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Proposals for a new rail station at Edginswell have been looked forward to for a decade, but a final funding gap exists. Will some of the funds released by the decision to scrap further phases of HS2 be used to resolve this?
Prime Minister.
I can assure my honourable friend that our decision on HS2 means every region of the country will now receive more transport investment than it would have done before, including the South West. I'm pleased that funding is happening to protect the vital rail link between Exeter and Plymouth. There'll be a £2.8 billion road resurfacing fund, and his constituents in the South West will continue to benefit from the £2 bus fare until the end of next year. I know that we have previously provided almost £8 million to progress the station that he mentions, and I'll reassure him that the Rail Minister will have heard his representations and continue to update him on the progress that they're making.
Dixman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. David Cameron was the well-paid public face of Lex Greensill. Greensill's companies are facing criminal investigations in Switzerland, Germany and here in the UK. David Cameron messaged ministers and officials 62 times over Greensill's COVID loan guarantees. The Treasury Select Committee called this a significant lack of judgment. What does his appointment say about the Prime Minister's own judgment?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman knows, the government commissioned Nigel Boardman to review all those issues and strengthen the system following those recommendations. But I'm very confident, Mr. Speaker, that this nation will be well represented by the former Prime Minister abroad. He's a Prime Minister with unrivalled experience of foreign affairs, will help Britain navigate an uncertain world in challenging times. And in contrast, the party opposite would offer to the country a shadow Foreign Secretary who backed his predecessor to be leader, was paid to appear on Russian television, and even voted against Trident. Does that sound like a man who should represent Britain?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The inflation numbers this morning were very welcome, but the tax burden continues to bite. So will the Prime Minister agree in principle with me that the concept of higher rate tax was never meant to drag in police sergeants, Band-Aid nurses, teachers with additional responsibilities and others, and that a priority for his Treasury ministers should be to return fairness to the tax thresholds?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable gentleman, and I'm pleased that the vast majority of people will continue not to pay the higher rate. I share his ambition to cut taxes for working people. Right now, inflation is falling, and we're sticking to our plan, which is delivering a halving of it this year, because that is the most effective tax cut that we could have delivered for the British people this year, rather than making it worse, as the party opposite would, borrowing money in the way that would be irresponsible and just drive up inflation interest rates. But I want to reassure him that I absolutely share his ambition to cut taxes for working people, and as we stabilise the economy, that's something that both the Chancellor and I are keen to deliver.
Mr. Speaker, my son loves football, and I understand the Prime Minister is a big Southampton supporter. So after his latest cabinet reshuffle, I wonder if he can tell me, since 2010, have we seen more Southampton managers being sacked, or have we seen more housing ministers come and go? The answer might help to explain why the government is failing so miserably in new home ownership.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker,
actually making more houses.
I'm pleased.
We've made 1 million houses.
I'm pleased that in the last figures that we saw, we had actually a record number of
I
first-time
knew
buyers,
it.
Mr. Speaker, and we're delivering 1 million homes over this Parliament.
Million, he said it.
Whilst the party opposite blocked our plans to unlock 100,000 homes at the same time. And when it comes to Southampton, I'm also pleased that we're on, I think, almost a 7 or 8 game unbeaten run.
Absolute.
If a two-state solution is to have a chance,
fuck off,
Hamas
Desmond
must
Swayne.
be defeated. But also, there will have to first be a more enlightened policy of administration in the occupied West Bank. Mustn't there?
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question. The UK's long-standing position on the Middle East peace process is very clear. We support a negotiated settlement leading to a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank. I spoke about this on Monday. Both Israelis and Palestinians have a right to live in peace and security. The longer-term governance of Gaza and security needs to be looked at in the round. It's something that I've discussed repeatedly with President Abbas. We agree with the United States that Gaza should ultimately be under the control of the Palestinian Authority, and we will continue to support President Abbas and his people to get to that outcome.
Mr. Speaker, a new generation of drugs, or can be Incapable and Kaftrio, is absolutely transforming the lives of patients with cystic fibrosis. So people who would have been waiting for double lung transplants now living happy, healthy lives.
Shocking.
But NICE is now saying we can't afford them. So will the Prime Minister and his new Health Secretary get round the table with NICE and with the drugs company to make sure that children being born with cystic fibrosis today get those life-saving drugs in the same way that children currently living with CF are getting them?
Prime Minister. I thank the Honourable Lady for raising an important issue. I'll of course ask the Health Secretary to look into it. She'll understand that NICE operates independently from government, but if there's a conversation that can be had, I'll ensure that it takes place.
A non-answer. So to be clear, the reason why this particular drug, which is incredible for I know 2 people with cystic fibrosis who have had this drug, and it has transformed their lives. It's taken them from a situation where their lung capacity was like 20%. It's taken up to 80, 90%. It has been absolutely transformative, but it's too expensive because the NHS doesn't have any money, because those Tory bastards have been running this country into the ground for the last 13 years. And they've been running the NHS into the ground. And so there's not enough money to give our citizens life-saving drugs because they're spending all their money on dodgy PPE contracts, on getting their mates on private helicopters, on secret deals to do with emphasis over in India, and for deporting people to Rwanda. Over £100 million spent on that nonsense. Over £1 billion spent on trying to put asylum seekers onto barges while their cases are looked at very, very slowly by the disgusting, tyrannical government. These are the real-world effects that we have because we don't have grown-ups in charge of this fucking country.
Davis?
Given the events of the last 6 weeks, can the Prime Minister tell the House why the government has not proscribed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government continues to take strong action against Iran, whilst people in the UK and around the world are under threat from the regime. We've sanctioned more than 350 Iranian individuals and entities, including the IRGC in its entirety. The National Security Act of this year implements new measures to protect the British public, including new offences for espionage and foreign interference. And while the government keeps the list of prescribed organisations under review, as members will be aware, it is a long-standing convention that we don't comment on whether a specific organisation is being considered for prescription.
He just said he had unprecedented experience. What would he say was David Cameron's finest foreign policy achievement?
Mr. Speaker, great question.
Mr. Speaker,
brilliant.
I think
go on.
There's Mr. Speaker, in fact, the many to pick from. But what I would say, is under his leadership, this country hosted what was widely considered to be one of the most successful G8 summits of recent time.
It was great to welcome the Prime Minister to Chelmsford earlier this year, where he launched his antisocial behaviour strategy, and he will be pleased to know that the local police have consistently been stepping up their activities. Last week they arrested 24 people for many crimes, and last night they took out a major significant county lines gang. So please, will he join me in
Did you just say panty lines instead of county lines?
And would he like to come back?
Did you just say panty?
Come out and patrol.
We roll back the tape.
Well, it was great to visit my honourable friend and launch the government's antisocial behaviour plan. Can I thank her for raising awareness about the important work that her local policing team is doing, and I'm pleased that they've been empowered by our strategy. Antisocial behaviour does make life miserable for many. That's why our plan being delivered is so important. It's having a difference across the country, including in her part of the world, and I'm pleased to see that crime under this government, in the year that we most recently have data for, has decreased by 56% since 2010.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's insulting that in the week that marks 20 years since the abolition of Section 28, the Prime Minister has appointed a minister without portfolio who frequently attacks the LGBTQ+ community with their so-called war on woke, seeks a return to those awful days, denying our human rights and attacking our very existence. Does the Prime Minister agree that he has manifestly and repeatedly failed? It's time for him to resign and to call a general election.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, actually, this government and previous have a proud record in championing LGBT rights. It was this government that introduced same-sex marriage, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to ensure that everyone in our society can live with tolerance and compassion.
Okay, first of all, it was the coalition. So it wasn't this government. See, they like to take the credit where there's credit to be taken, and they don't like to take the shame of the fact that they've been in charge for 13 years and nothing's ever got better. But it's really, really important to note that on the vote for marriage equality, so gay people, lesbians, people could get married to the person that they loved and the person that loved them, most Tories voted against it. It got through because of votes from the Lib Dems and from Labour. Really important
and have
to
every opportunity available for them. That's what we have delivered,
despite
and that's what we'll continue delivering.
Hello, Brian.
Mr. Speaker, last year through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, my family and I welcomed a refugee family to our home. And I'm proud that this country has always offered refuge to those who need it. But it's essential that we in this country decide who comes to this country. The Prime Minister has rightly said that he will do whatever it takes to stop the small boats and the evil trade around them. But isn't it apparent that after this morning's ruling, what it will take is a new law to override the Human Rights Act and to cut through the thicket of case law built up by judicial activism so that we can bring back control of our borders and stop the small boats.
You want to take away the thing that gives us
Mr. Speaker,
rights.
it's right that we go through the judgment
horrorshow.
carefully and properly. And as I said, the government has already been working in advance on a new treaty with Rwanda to address the concerns that have been raised, that were raised previously and that were raised by the Supreme Court, who also acknowledge that changes can be delivered to address those issues. But as I said, and I'll repeat, if it becomes clear that our domestic legal frameworks, or indeed international conventions, are still frustrating plans after that point, I am prepared to change our laws and revisit those international relationships, because we are absolutely committed to stopping the boat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, just before we go to the next question, just to be very clear, in the statement, in the judgment this morning, just a few hours ago, they specifically said that it didn't matter, right, if we left the European Convention on Human Rights, because their ruling was found to be under UN law as well. So these are international treaties that we had signed up to decades ago in some circumstances. It also broke national law in this country, so they would have to change national law. They'd have to pull out the European Convention of Human Rights or the Council of Europe, and also would have to pull out of the freaking United Nations, all so we couldn't have human rights. And they want to take those rights away from us, as we've seen with them, you know, taking away our right to protest, etc., or even think about protesting, taking those rights away from us, the people, rights that they will still continue to enjoy because they're all rich. They're all bloody millionaires. Everyone on that side of the house is a millionaire. Bear that in mind next time you hear one of them stand up and speak.
Prime Minister, thank you for meeting with my constituent Noam. It has been 40 days since Noam's mum, Ada Sagi, was kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th. We all condemn Hamas's actions and fight for the return of all hostages. Noam wants the language of love to be louder than the language of hate. 11,000 Palestinians have been killed, over 4,000 of them children. International law is important. Does the Prime Minister agree that you can support Israel but also call out breaches of international law?
Mr. Speaker, I've been consistent from the start that whilst Israel has a right to defend itself, it is important that it complies with international law. It's a point I have made on every meeting or phone conversation that I've had with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And it was a privilege to meet her constituents and to hear the pain that they are going through, which I have enormous sympathy for, which is why we're doing absolutely everything we can to bring hostages home. We're engaged intensively in diplomatic activity in the region and working to get also foreign nationals and British nationals. I'm pleased to say well over 200 have now left Gaza, and we will continue to do everything we can to ensure that everyone can safely leave who needs to.
Holly Bancroft.
The Prime Minister knows I stand unapologetically with my steelmakers in Scunthorpe. And he knows that I believe, as many across this House do, that the UK must retain a virgin steelmaking capability for strategic reasons, if nothing else. Will he reassure the House that he is personally following developments at British Steel and doing all he can to retain what is a vital sovereign capability?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for the question? I know she is a fantastic champion for her local steelworking community, and I hope she is reassured by the action that this government has already taken to support steelmaking in our country, reaching a landmark agreement with Tata Steel to safeguard thousands of jobs there, and previously in the pandemic as well, because I agree with her, it is important to our industrial base, and we'll continue to have constructive conversations with all those companies to ensure that we can support them in their transition to a cleaner, greener steelmaking future.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the British Independent Retail Association, on a matter that affects every constituency across this kingdom, 82% of retailers don't even bother reporting physical attacks on their staff.
You don't even
attacked.
bother turning
It takes
up.
shopkeepers
Your party doesn't bother turning up
to
to
sell
Northern
an
Ireland
additional
Assembly
12
makes
items to make up for an item that has been stolen. Will the Prime Minister support efforts that are being made by that association and many others across this House to ensure that retailers are protected, that theft against them is called out, and that they are supported in every way possible? And today at a meeting in Dining Room C, will he encourage those members from those shops in their efforts?
Can I firstly pay tribute to the work that my honourable friend does on this issue as the Vice Chair of the All-Party Group on Retail Crime. He's absolutely right about the importance of this issue. Working in my mum's shop and her pharmacy growing up, I understand exactly what he's talking about when small businesses are the victims of crime. What I can tell him is that our expectation and our agreement with police forces is that all shoplifting should be followed up where there is evidence, such as CCTV footage, which is something that we did earlier this year, and also that any violent or abusive behaviour towards shop workers, particularly those who provide a valuable service to the public, is never acceptable, and that is why we introduced a statutory aggravating factor for assaults on workers that provide a service to the public, and I commend him on everything he's doing on this issue.
Questions to William Cash.
Thank you. Will my right honourable friend give the House an assurance that he has made clear to the new Foreign Secretary, who of course we wish well, that and that he has agreed that his policy and conduct of EU-related affairs will be consistent with the government's 2019 election manifesto and the referendum, and is now fully committed to UK parliamentary sovereignty, self-government and democracy, and in accordance with the government's subsequent legislation.
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm delighted to give my honourable friend that assurance, because this is a government that is seizing the opportunities of Brexit, aided by his advice and support, passing the rule bill, ensuring that we can regulate our growth industries in a more competitive way and sign trade deals with the fastest growing regions across the world, including most recently the CPTPP. It's this government that's delivering the benefits of Brexit to every part of our country, and long may that continue.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
Oh man, God, that was painful, wasn't it? Very, very sorry for that. You know how it is. We these things are sent to test us, and Prime Minister's questions is just. I mean, it's painful. It's painful having to watch the equivalent of a small child say, "I never did it," when they're standing there holding the football that went through the window, and there's no one else about. And you've got them on CCTV, and you saw them with your own two eyes smashing the freaking window, and they're like, "I didn't do it. It wasn't me. Other boys came, bigger boys came," and that's what we get week in, week out from these absolute clowns in the Tory party, in particular, Rishi Sunak. I mean, it's pretty devastating at the moment. But we're going to go over quickly to James Cleverly. I'm very sorry about this, but he's making a statement about the Supreme Court judgment today.
The important thing to note is that the judgment of the court today was made on the basis of facts from 15 months ago. Wow. The government, of course, fully respects the Supreme Court, but its judgment does not weaken our resolve to deter people from making these illegal, dangerous, and unnecessary journeys. This is a lengthy judgment which we now need to digest and reflect upon. We take our obligations to the courts very seriously, which is why we have already taken action to address a number of the points raised by the lower courts. It is only through breaking the business model of illegal people traffickers that we can fully take control of our borders and save lives. Safe routes. This is why the PM backed our deal with Rwanda, passed legislation to deliver it, and said last December that other countries would follow our lead. And what we have now seen is other countries are indeed now also exploring third country models for illegal migration, including Austria, Germany, Denmark, and Italy in their deal with Albania. A new and innovative model for processing asylum claims. Nothing in the Supreme Court judgment today dims our commitment. The Supreme Court has said that there are issues with Rwanda's asylum system which could create the possibility of someone being returned to a country where they could face persecution. I am struck by the court's remarks about the risk of refoulement. The structural, and I quote, the structural changes and capacity building needed to eliminate that risk may be delivered in the future, but they were not shown to be in place at the time when the lawfulness of this policy had been considered in these proceedings, making reference to the earlier proceedings. We have a plan to provide exactly that certainty. We anticipate that this we anticipated this judgment as a possible result, and for the last few months have been working on a plan to provide the certainty that the court demands. We have been working with Rwanda to build capacity and amend agreements with Rwanda to make clear that those sent there cannot be sent to another country.
Sorry, what? You're still going on about Rwanda? Oh my God!
Is to uphold our agreement, to upgrade our agreement to a treaty as soon as possible.
What the hell?
That will make it
just been
absolutely clear
told.
to our...
Sorry, I'm going to pause it there. So they've been told that they can't send people to Rwanda because Rwanda's not a safe place to send them to. And they're trying to go, okay, well, we'll have a new treaty that says you definitely, absolutely won't redeport these people to somewhere else. That wasn't the only problem. There was also the problem that Rwanda routinely tortures people to death. Rwanda puts threats in against Rwandan citizens living in the UK, so they have to employ our police officers to protect those families from the government of Rwanda. This was all in the report this morning.
And to
Was he not listening to it?
That the risks laid out by the court today have been responded to, will be consistent with international law and ensure that Parliament is able to scrutinise it. The Prime Minister has said that if our domestic legal framework frustrates our plans, he is prepared to change our laws. But I will inform the House we are not going to put forward proposals simply to manufacture an unnecessary row for political gain. We have a plan to deliver bullshit. They're not listening, Mr. Speaker.
Bullshit.
So they might want to listen to this. We have a plan to deliver the Rwanda deal, and we will do whatever it takes to stop the boats. Mr. Speaker, illegal immigration is a huge global challenge, and that challenge is growing. It was a topic that I regularly raised with countries across Europe and around the wider world in my former role as a Foreign Secretary. But, Mr. Speaker, monthly illegal migrant numbers are trending upwards right across Europe, with an exception. Our numbers are falling. Illegal migration is dangerous. It undermines the laws of our country. It is unfair on those who come here legally and on the British people who play by the rules. It must and it will
British
stop.
people play by the rules.
This is a wonderful country.
Sorry. We don't need to go somewhere else, mate. We don't have a war in this country. But if we did, and I felt that my life was in peril, I would want other countries to treat me with dignity and respect. You're saying the opposite of that. You're saying, well, what we'll do is we'll set things up so that we'll take away the rights from people like me who live here and were born here. We're going to take your rights away, Graham, in order to take the rights away from people coming from other countries. And if you try and run away, we want other countries to treat you like we treat asylum seekers who are coming here. Like shit.
And I recognise that
millionaires,
because I have
privately
a chance to see
educated
it as
millionaires.
others see it from overseas. And inevitably, people aspire to come here. But more people coming here illegally is not fair for those struggling to get GP appointments, those trying to get housing.
How about Brexit's not fair for people who want to see a doctor or don't want to wait on an NHS waiting list for over a year? Like 8 million people are on the waiting list at the moment. 8 million. Sorry, there's 8 million operations. So it's about 6 million people, and some of them are waiting for more than one operation. And they're taking life-saving medication away from people with cystic fibrosis. Because of Brexit. Because of Brexit shortages, because of the price of the medicine is too high and we can't afford it. In the sixth richest country in the world, we can't afford it. A country in which our leader goes about on a bloody jet plane. A jet plane, ladies and gentlemen, a jet plane.
Or access to schools,
Blackpool.
or those people who are living near asylum hotels. The impacts are felt on some of the poorest in our society, and we have a duty to address their concerns.
No, you never address their concerns.
To protect our country, the Labour Party has voted.
They've got no money, they've got no property, they've got no savings, they can't go on holiday anymore because of you knobheads, and now you're taking away their rights, their human rights, and you're saying, oh, we're doing this for the poor.
Time and time again, not to protect our borders, over 80 times. Rwanda is ready and willing to help. The UNHCR operates its own refugee scheme in Rwanda, and Rwanda is ready to receive thousands of people, process their claims, give them excellent care, and then support them to integrate into Rwanda. This is an African country full of potential and promise. We have a future-focused and mutually beneficial partnership with them, and we plan to deliver. The Rwanda plan has only ever been one tool in our toolbox. We have a plan to drive down numbers, and our plan is working.
Okay, what's the Sorry, he just said it's not the only plan, right? Literally just said that although the Supreme Court has said there's no chance of you sending people to Rwanda, they're going to try again to send people to Rwanda.
The Prime Minister launched a 10-point plan in December. The number of people entering the UK illegally in small boats had more than quadrupled. While illegal migration in the rest of Europe continues to rise, crossings to the UK are now down by a third. Mr. Speaker, we are tackling illegal migration at every stage in the journey of a would-be illegal migrant. Our plan is working. Last year, the Prime Minister agreed the largest ever small boats deal with France. We have expanded our joint intelligence cell to deepen intelligence sharing and dismantle the criminal gangs.
That's a lie. Small boats deal that we had before this Brexit government said that we could send small boats back to France if they came over here. They got rid of that. They got rid of that. That seems a lot more comprehensive than the deal that they've got to give some money to the French government to spend on more police in Calais.
Cutting-edge surveillance technology is in play, and we have beefed up security
How about
infrastructure
you
such
make
as CCTV
safe routes
at key
for
border
refugees?
crossings across
How about you
the
make
Channel.
safe routes?
We have ensured that more French officials and officers patrol French beaches, and they are working closely with UK staff. And so far, in 2023, nearly 22,000 crossing attempts have been prevented because of the close coordination between British and French officials. That means less money that the British taxpayers have to spend on hotels, less profits for the criminal gangs, and fewer people to...
Do you know what would reduce the amount you're spending on hotels, mate? Processing the asylum applications, and also allowing people who are claiming asylum to work. Something that they do even in America. Even in America, they let people claiming asylum work. We don't, because we're the people in charge just want to make things horrible. They want to make this country horrible. They want to make it basically unlivable for everyone who isn't born with a silver spoon rammed up their arse like this piece of shit here.
Process. It sends a clear message to the gangs and those who want to cross that we will stop them.
Safe for work, Graham. Safe for work.
As Foreign Secretary, I work closely with my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, to agree a new deal with Albania. with better data sharing, closer operational working and financial support. And in response to the work that he and I did,
sorry, I apologise.
The number of Albanian small boat arrivals has fallen by 90%. 90% so far during 2023, and we have returned over 4,600 people
increased
by
just
100%
in 2017.
We also want to make sure it's harder to get into one of those boats in the first place, including reducing the supply of boats. We are targeting the movement of these goods, such as dinghies, such as engines, that are used to facilitate the crossing in order to undermine a key component of the smuggler's business model. And those who do make it through will not be able to stay. We've expedited returns agreements with countries including France, Albania, Turkey and Italy. We have increased the number of illegal working raids
Italian refugees
by almost 70%. We have cut the asylum legacy backlog by over 59,000 cases. We have freed up hundreds of hotel beds with the use of alternative sites. We have announced the closure of the first 50 asylum hotels, and we have passed the Illegal Migration Act, the most ambitious immigration legislation in decades, which makes clear that the only route to asylum in the UK is via one of the safe and legal routes we have put in place.
What safe and legal routes? They don't exist.
Who comes to the UK illegally will not be able to stay. They will be removed either to their home country if it is safe, or to a third country if it is not. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that our commitment to ending illegal migration is unwavering. We are a positive outlier in Europe. Our efforts are working. Small boat crossings are down. Our decision-making is faster. We are removing those with no right to be here and taking action against those who are working illegally. We have done deals with multiple countries and will continue to do so. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, arrivals down, decisions faster, returns up. We are getting on with the job, and we will do whatever it takes to deliver on our commitment to stop the boats, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary. Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the new Home Secretary to his post. He is the 8th Conservative Home Secretary in 8 years, and what a mess he has inherited. The court conclusions today are damning. It exposes the complete failure of the Prime Minister's flagship Rwanda policy, exposes a complete failure of the Prime Minister's judgment in making it the central part of his policy, and the complete failure of Conservatives to get the most basic grip of their boats and asylum chaos. No serious plan on the dangerous boat crossings that are undermining our border security and putting lives at risk that all of us want to see end. No serious plan to sort out the chaos in the asylum system, people in costly asylum hotels because of the soaring backlog that should be ended, and the readiness to spend over £140 million of taxpayers' money on this plan, money we can't get back now that this policy has totally failed. And it adds to the disastrous judgment of the Prime Minister not just appointing and backing the previous Home Secretary, who was unfit for the job. Now, I don't agree with pretty much anything his predecessor as Home Secretary ever said, but she was right on this message to the Prime Minister. She said, if we lose in the Supreme Court, you will have wasted a year and an Act of Parliament only to arrive back at square one. Your magical thinking has meant you have failed to prepare any sort of credible Plan B. Wasting time, wasting money, and letting the country down. That is the Conservatives' record. Now, the court outlines the catalogue of problems with the policy, but ministers knew all about them. When it was first announced 18 months ago, I raised in this House the problems with the Israel-Rwanda deal. They were warned many times about failures and weaknesses in the Rwanda asylum system, but they just pressed on. And even if it had been found lawful today, they've admitted it would only have covered a few hundred people anyway, at a time when 100,000 people applied for asylum in the UK last year, on the Conservatives' watch, and that would have also cost around twice as much per person as deciding cases in the UK. The truth is the government has wasted not just 1 but 5 years of failing to deal with this. 5 years ago there were just a few hundred people crossing in boats, but they let criminal gangs take hold along the channel. They let asylum decisions collapse, so the backlog soared, and there are now 20% more people in asylum hotels than there were when the Prime Minister promised to end them. So will he now tell us how much in total has the government spent on this failed Rwanda plan so far? The House has a right to know. Yes, he says he wants a new treaty. How much more will that cost? And the court judgment says, despite his optimism, it says of the changes that are needed, the Rwandan government indicated that the contemplated arrangements might not be straightforward to implement in practice. And the court says the provision of resources does not mean that the problems we have described can be resolved in the short term. So again, more of the magical thinking. And what does this mean for the Prime Minister's flagship legislation? Because he boasted about passing it only yesterday, but the government hasn't actually commenced the central clauses of the law, because without Rwanda, and frankly even with Rwanda, the policy doesn't work and will just lead to an endless, ever-increasing permanent backlog. So can he confirm now he won't in fact be implementing the central tenets of that law this year? And can he confirm that this means the Prime Minister's pledges to introduce the new law, to stop the boats and to also to end hotel use will all be broken this year? And why will he not put that money into a proper plan to tackle the boats? I don't believe the new Home Secretary ever believed in the Rwanda plan. He distanced himself from it and his predecessor's language on it. He may even, on occasion, have privately called it batshit. But he and I agree. We need action to stop boat crossings that are undermining border security and putting lives at risk. We need a properly controlled and managed system for asylum and refugees. So let's concentrate on the things that can work. We support the work with France along the northern coast. We want it to go further. We support the work with Albania, with other countries across Europe to tackle the gangs, but it is frankly far, far too weak. We need a proper, comprehensive, massively scaled up plan to go after the criminal gangs, and a proper system to clear the backlog, to have a proper returns unit in place so we can end hotel use. And instead of that cost going up from £6 million to £8 million a day on his watch, let us end hotel use and save the taxpayer £2 billion. That should be common ground. So I could suggest to him that he stops wasting taxpayers' money on more failing schemes, that he ditches the magical thinking and the culture wars of his predecessors, and that he ditches the gimmicks and finally gets a grip.
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I think one of the dangers of writing a critique of government policy before you've read the facts laid out in the statement is the statement makes the critique obsolete. She talks about hotel usage, which I might remind the House is coming down. She talks about small boat arrivals in the UK, which I will remind the House are coming down. She talks about closer working relationships with our European partners, which I will remind the House we are already doing. I've written here in response to the various questions, does she have a plan? Does Labour have a plan? And Mr. Speaker, if the bench is opposite could curb their enthusiasm and listen to what I was about to say next, I was going to concede that it's clear they do have a plan. And their plan, their great idea, is to do what the government is already doing. Mr. Speaker, which is why we are bucking the European trend when other countries are seeing 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 100% increases in their illegal arrivals. We are seeing a third reduction in ours, bucking the trend. We have always said,
an absolute
Rwanda and the deterrent effect of the Rwanda plan is an important tool in our toolbox. We have never claimed it was the only tool in our toolbox. We have pursued we have pursued, and when I say we, I of course mean my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, with me watching him from King Charles Street, but the collective we is appropriate here. We have always pursued a range of options, and as I set out in my statement, those activities are having an effect. And Mr. Speaker, my final point, the mask has slipped. The mask has slipped because the glee that I detect on the other benches for this temporary setback on the delivery of this plan displays what we on our side of the House know to be true. They don't want migration control to work. They don't want to take control of their own borders. They would rather delegate it to anybody else.
If they wanted to stop the boats coming across, they could give safe routes. They could set up an asylum application centre in France that we pay for, and the French help us with. We run it and we pay for it, and you can apply for asylum there. And if you don't get it and you come across on the boat, we can send you back straight away because you've been told that you can't come here. That's how you stop the boats immediately, for a fraction of the price of what we're paying. Put people up in hotels in this country.
Just sorry. I want to hear the Home Secretary. I don't need the front bench. You may pull your face. The bottom line is I want to hear it quietly, because our people also at home, our constituents wants to hear it. When you're chunnering so loud, they cannot. Home Secretary.
Indeed.
In which case, Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all welcome my
Theresa May? Sorry, we've got to leave. The old Home Secretary there standing up, Theresa May. But I didn't say I was going to cover the illegal migration statement by James Cleverly, the guy who proves that nominative determinism is bullshit. But yeah, thanks for joining me for supposedly safe for work PMQs. Sorry, I went off on one there, a bit sweary. Big thanks to One Angry Pagan and Captain Bart Roberts for the super chats on this one. I'll be back tomorrow. Well, I'll be back tomorrow in the chat. Phil will be back tomorrow hosting the wonderful Morning Brew, and he'll be dissecting and disseminating some of the big news stories of the next 24 hours, including obviously the fallout from the Rwanda scheme being deemed unlawful, and yet the government still planning to plough ahead with it, which is, it's remarkable on so many levels, really. I will be back tomorrow evening for people who are on Discord. So the Discord server that we've got set up, it's a bit like Zoom meeting. It's a bit like an old bulletin board with like Zoom capabilities. If you're not on it already, if you are a patron of mine or Labour Social, or you're a member of this channel, you should be able to get free access to that. And I'll be doing a show on there tomorrow at 8:30, and hopefully every Thursday afterwards, just for our YouTube members and for the patrons who help honestly keep this channel afloat. Just on a related topic, I'm going to Ukraine at the end of the month to deliver some Lego to a children's centre in Kharkiv, and hopefully enough Lego to actually send to some other children's centres around Ukraine. If you'd like to help us in that, if you go to UK4UKR.com, UK4UKR.com, and you can find more details on how you can help out on there. The link is in the description below. If you could help us out with that would be fantastic. Sorry for swearing, sorry for getting a little bit wound up there, but as you can probably imagine, it is a little bit exhausting. We've had 13 years of this, 13 years of it's someone else's fault, and it's just so infuriating that still yet today they have their asses handed to them by the Supreme Court. They're told this isn't going to work. There's no way, there is no world in which this can work because it breaks British law, it breaks European law, it breaks international law under the UN. And yet, here we are for some reason. God knows why. Anyway, right, so until next time, I'll just say thank you very, very much for watching, and I will see you soon. And until then, hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.